Good evening and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, December 14th. We're starting right at 6 p.m. At this time, I'd like to confirm the agenda. Are there any emergent items from any of the councillors tonight? Seeing none, anything from administration or ledge services?
Yeah, administration is requesting that council add item 7.3, council CAO dialogue, advice from officials, FOIP section 2401A to the agenda for tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Montgomery?
Thank you. I will move the agenda as amended.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And that motion is carried. We move now to item 3. We have no delegations tonight. And that brings us to 4.1, confirmation of the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes for November 9th, 2022. Councillor Langmaid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move that Council adopt the November 9th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes as presented. Thank
you for that. All in favor? That motion is carried. We move now to 5, business, 5.1, 22-23 RCMP Quarter 2 Municipal Policing Report. Staff Sergeant Wilgosh is joining us tonight. Good evening and welcome, Staff Sergeant.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you again to provide an update on our policing and community safety efforts in Strathmore through Quarter 2, which covers our fiscal Quarter 2, which is July 1st to September 30th, 2022, which seems kind of odd presenting on that because I remember warm months and I look outside and it's not the same. So all of my comments will be made through the CAO to the chair and the rest of council for the duration of this report. Speaking on our 3 priorities that we have identified for the year and on the update on our results. Number 1, with respect to the reduction of our property crimes, the identified programs remain in place with that are yielding positive results with respect to dealing with our crime rates and trying to make sure that we're within our historical averages and norms with respect to crime. Briefly, with our habitual offender management program, we were monitoring 13 offenders and properties within our detachment area, which have been laid out and identified for you with respect to some of the results that we were seeing during those checks. I can say that during Quarter 2, we conducted over 153 documented offender checks and property checks, which did result in a number of stolen vehicle recoveries, vehicle seizures, arrest of persons with new offenses, as well as execution of arrest warrants on individuals that we've encountered. I can tell you, at least in the past week, mainly in our western detachment area through into the Rockview County portion, we've probably arrested a dozen more offenders, all of which in stolen vehicles with double-digit counts, so more than 10 charges on informations for new charges. So we've been focusing a lot of our efforts towards that area to try and, I guess, deal with issues as they arise out of the Calgary urban area before they essentially travel east towards Strathmore and our rural communities in Wheatland County. Outside of that, we continue with our Persons of Interest program, which involves, again, persons that we're aware of within our community, and again, to ensure that they're remaining compliant with a law-abiding lifestyle. Our security screw program remains active. Our theft prevention program is something we're still working on, but for the time being, we've been focusing on some of the more pressing programs that we have, such as our habitual offender management program and response to ongoing calls for service in our areas. We have our SUPTED, or crime prevention through environmental design program, is still underway. In fact, with our Rockview County enhanced position and one of our members who is working in an administrative capacity, we're developing a business outreach questionnaire and a property survey form that will be rolled out within Wrangler Park, as well as our businesses and industrial areas here in Strathmore. With that, we're going to try to identify what weaknesses may be with certain businesses and their properties to try and mitigate them through implementing any number of measures that make their properties less desirable for those who might want to break into their businesses or steal high-value items. Certainly ways for us to gain more information about who the business owners are, who the key holders are, people who we can contact after hours, not to mention to see if there's any level of interest in a capture-type program. Now, the capture program is something I rolled out when I was in Chestermere. It's not something that's new, but it was something we brought to the city just because people have more access and more cost-effective access to video surveillance. Starting with our businesses, if we do have a high level of interest, then we'll seek to I guess, pull the community as far as their interest is concerned before we roll out that program. The program itself is a voluntary subscription type of program where people can go to a third-party website, they can register themselves, they can create an account, and identify that they have video surveillance and that they're willing to share it with the police if there's a crime committed in their community or something that might help us in our investigative efforts, depending on what may have happened. When people have signed up, a couple of things with the program is that the police don't have live access or view to people's cameras. We have to actually call the property owner to see if they want to provide us with video footage, and it's up to them to provide it to us if they consent to do so. We've had success in the past, particularly with a few items that come to mind when I was in Chestermere, but we're really trying to see if there's a level of interest here in Strathmore and to try and gauge how many people do have cost-effective means of video surveillance within their properties that they'd be willing to share with us. As a police officer and a user conducting investigations in the community on the back end of this type of program from their computers and their cars, they can plot their location on a map. It'll generate a list of locations of people who have subscribed and a list of contact information, which can really save time depending on the type of investigation when it comes to trying to uncover valuable video surveillance or evidence that might lead to the apprehension of an offender or to whether establish or determine whether or not an offense had actually occurred in a specific area, depending on what's reported to us. So that's part of the CEPTEB program that we're trying to roll out. Again, it does take time, but we are making some progress in that regard. As you can see through the graphics that I provided to you concerning the three targeted areas that we're looking at, which is break-and enters, theft of motor vehicle, and theft of motor vehicles in our area. For Q2 this year, while we saw slight variations and slight increases compared to Q2 last year, when we look at our 4-year historical averages, we're either at or far below what our historical averages are. And as discussed before, for the years of 2020 and 2021, we did experience an artificially low crime rate just based on the COVID measures that were in place and the fact that people weren't going to work or they were working from home, homes were all occupied, and a number of other reasons why we were seeing artificially low crime rates. So when we take a look at the last 4 years to see where our historical norms are, to try and really get a realistic picture as far as where we are in crime, we're at or below our historical averages and norms. So we are making good progress in Q2, and we are seeing a downward trend, and hopefully over the next year we'll start seeing more stabilization of our numbers, and we can give you a better, clearer picture as far as where we're at. What I can say is we're in good shape. The crime trends are trending downward as far as Q2 results are concerned, and our members are working hard to ensure that they're protecting our communities. With traffic safety, I've laid out some of our enforcement and road safety measures within the community. As you can see there, we did 12 documented check stops within the area, and we were able to check a total of about 742 vehicles. And out of that, we saw 2 immediate roadside suspensions, 3 immediate roadside suspensions for impaired driving, and we had a high level of mandatory alcohol screening submissions that were done during those check stops. As you can see, those couple of pictures that you see there were during the stampede, and we did have a high level of visibility during that special event in July, or end of July. Our bar walk program remains in place. Our members documented 41 bar walks in our Strathmore establishments, during Q2. And again, this is just a low number. At times, members don't have the opportunity to tick that tick box in their notebooks, but they are maintaining a high level of presence. At our Enhanced Road Safety Initiative, it's still under development, but we're making progress in that regard to try and enhance our visibility within our roadways. I've given you some visualizations with respect to our collision rates, and in Q2, reportable collisions, we see a bit of a variation, but we see like an increase of 3 during the quarter, which is a slight increase, but we're going to see some variations. Generally, we want to see that we're keeping in pace with our historical norms, and we do see that with respect to reportable collisions, we are down from our historical averages over the past 4 years. Injury collisions in Q2 remain the same, and we do see a slight increase, but we look up to 4 injury collisions in Strathmore. That's up from 3.25. So you can see when we get to those minimalistic numbers that when we see double-digit increases, we just have to look at the numbers that we're looking at. Our third priority, which is one that we've spent a lot of time focusing on, is with respect to our community engagement and our community engagement and Indigenous community engagement. And as you can see, we've been maintaining our efforts in those areas. For school visits, just because we captured June and July, August were essentially off throughout summer, our members conducted 20 visits. And as you can see, we've had a number of different events that our members were involved in. You'll see that we have our attendance at public library events where our members are interacting with the students there. We were present at the Legion Centennial Ceremony with the unveiling of the Afghanistan War Plaque. We participated in Camp Day with our Tim Hortons locations. And the couple of pictures you see there, those are two different members actually in the dunk tank. And both of them got wet. One of them, it was actually the member's children that were there that didn't know that throwing the ball. They just went and pressed the button and dunked mom in the tank. So I guess a little bit of payback for no big dessert the night before. But it was a good time to be had by all during the members' efforts when they're engaged with the community. We still have our community liaison program that it's active. Our members continue to make contact with our community groups and again engage when necessary or field questions. And again, generally being available to our groups within the community. With respect to Indigenous community engagement, more specifically on September 30th, during the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, I was present with the town of Strathmore's, morning programming, and then in the afternoon, we'd arranged for a blanket ceremony and an eagle feather blessing ceremony with our detachment members. We had a member of SLT there with us and town staff there as well. I could say that two members, one of the members of my detachment brought their children, who both have Indigenous descent, and as well as one of our district advisory NCOs brought his family as well to participate in the ceremony itself. It was a very informative ceremony for all of our members, and it was a way to connect with our Indigenous partners that were there. When we moved to the Eagle Feather Blessing Ceremony, really what that involves with the Eagle Feather is a way that our Indigenous clients can swear on the Eagle Feather rather than on a Bible. Now, the Eagle Feather represents a spiritual animal that flies the closest to the Creator, and that's why there's a heavy significance placed on eagle feathers. With the blessing of the eagle feather, which happens on a yearly basis, it's a matter of purifying the eagle feather itself and making sure that those who wish to swear their oaths on the eagle feather can do so. So that was a part two to our Indigenous or blanket ceremony that happened that day. The eagle feather is available at our detachment, and upon request of our Indigenous clients, they can swear their oaths on the eagle feather. It's been a bit of a whirlwind presentation there, but last and most not least, our other initiatives. We still have our Strathmore Youth and Indigenous Youth Diversion Program. We have great partnerships within the town of Strathmore. Should we have a youth client or someone worthy of a diversionary measure, we've also been partnering with other agencies that deliver the same programs, such as the Strathmore Youth Justice Committee, as well as a newly formed group in Chestermere that covers basically our Rocky County area in Langdon. So we're just trying to get up off the ground with them as well for our rural residents that live in Rocky County. Again, it's an option that's available for those who fit the criteria, and that being an admission of wrongdoing, an expression of legitimate remorse, willingness to make recompense, and most importantly, the victim consents to participating in the diversionary program. Our Watch Clerk program is active. We have just finished a round of hiring. We have a new clerk who just started 2 weeks ago. We have a new one starting next week and another one starting first week of January, so we will be up to full strength at that point in time. In the interim, just managing some vacancies. We've had members that are on light duties or administrative duties that have been filling the gaps in those areas to make sure that we have that frontline support for our members. Calls for service, I've laid out where we are for this year. We're slightly up this year from last year, but again, we're typically within our historical norms with those numbers. And with that, that's essentially our Q2 report. I'm open to any questions that anyone may have with respect to our activities through Q2 or with any of our crime stats that were provided with this report.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for your report, and the clarity of it is so impressive too. Seeing, and what I like about it is with you going through the various initiatives, it's a chance to revisit the plan, see how we're progressing on it. I had one question on page 7 of the report. It's basically the graph that shows September 2022, 2023 quite a bit higher. Is that a product of us, I can't say us, but of you and your men and women being out in force that much more in September? Or why would there be a jump, do you think?
In collisions, sometimes you have anomalies where you just happen to have a cluster of collisions that happen at any particular point in time. The weather and road conditions weren't a particular factor through September, but we are seeing more intersection and distracted driving type of incidents that do tend to happen, and sometimes they just happen in clusters. So as far as September is concerned, the collision rate itself, we could try to control that with enforcement and higher visibility, and that does have a significant impact. But at times we're going to have those types of anomalies where we just happen to have those clusters when it rains, it pours, so to speak.
So thank you for that. And so do you think that a lot of our traffic incidents or traffic situations are due to distracted driving and excessive speed, or is there a commonality that you're finding?
Within the town of Strathmore, when I look through these numbers, it's not so much like speed isn't a factor with respect to these collisions. It's more, I guess, driver error, if you will, whether it's merging into an intersection when the coast isn't clear. Again, distracted driving when people aren't aware of their surroundings, and intersection-related offenses. So again, with the distracted driving, if someone stopped at a stop sign and they rear-end another vehicle or don't see them there, those are some of the causes of collisions that we're typically seeing, and in particular in September.
Thank you. And I noticed on page 15, even though in Q1 it kind of hits you that there were 20 thefts from motor vehicles, it's still below that 4-year average. So that's definitely good news. So you and your officers are doing a really good job being out there patrolling, and I applaud the effort too as far as trying to create that security program where people can walk around and check on vehicles being left unlocked on driveways and things. So there's some really good ideas there. So that gives me hope too that we're well below that 4-year average. Councilor Montgomery, and then Deputy Mayor Peterson.
Thank you. And thank you for the update, Staff Sergeant. One question I have has to do with the watch clerk program. It mentions in here that with a fully staffed watch clerk pool, there exists the potential to increase frontline policing from approximately 2,281 hours or to 2,281 to 3,421 man hours each year. So is that saying it's going to increase by that much, or it's increasing from 2,281 to 3,421?
So that's a general range, because it's hard to really put a number on exactly how many man hours can we save. Like it's difficult to track. We can't really score on an ongoing basis, and it'd be difficult to do so exactly how many man hours we can track. This is a range of the potential range of man hours that can be saved, and this was developed based on the average time it takes for certain tasks out of our general duty task bank. So the task bank is the myriad of tasks that investigators complete and an average amount of time that they do. Now, based on what portion of those tasks that these watch clerks can do, that's where we were able to formulate a range of time that they can save our members. I can tell you, just based on the increasing complexity of investigations, the number of offenses that our members might be dealing with a prolific offender. So as an example, we had one offender who was bound by 2 probation orders, 2 release orders, with an outstanding number of about over 40 charges between the 2 release orders, and we laid another 20-plus charges on this particular offender, not to mention processing a stolen vehicle, dealing with the evidence which is inside the vehicle. Typically, we're finding a lot more stolen items, some of which we can connect to an owner, some of which we can't identify an owner. So with the increasing complexity of some of the encounters that our members are having, that's where we can say there will be a much higher value placed on how much support that watch clerk can do. So if you can imagine going through, collecting all the release documents from the various police agencies that issued them during those encounters, determining what charges need to be laid, going into the database. So JOIN is the provincial database for our Alberta courts, entering that information, producing these documents, compiling, getting it ready for a bail hearing. If a member were to be doing that, they would not be on the road. So it's more getting to the point with the higher complexity of the investigation itself, and particularly with the number of charges and how many factors are at play. That's where that watch clerk is saving a lot more time. So I guess coming back to perhaps maybe the core of your question, that's where we predict the ranges when we're running with 4 watch clerks. I can tell you that if we were to reassess the general duty task bank and some of those tasks and what we're seeing here in Strathmore, that range may potentially even be higher.
Okay, great, thank you. And my second question just has to do with the youth diversion program. Is there a difference between the youth and the youth Indigenous diversion program?
Nothing at all. So why I'm classifying that is everyone who lives in Strathmore, whether you're an Indigenous person, and we do have a high level of Indigenous people who live in our community, or youth from regular walks of life, they're all candidates for this program. Now, the reason I want to make particular point of including that is it's a matter of that, we've been able to take the steps to gain the support of Secant Nation through Councilor Ruben Breaker and through the consultations that we've had to be included in the program to make sure that there are no misconceptions should an Indigenous youth be carrying out community service in our community. It's a matter of making sure that we're specifically identifying that youth from all walks of life can participate, and we do have an Indigenous portion to that as well. And that part of the program does involve ensuring that we're involving Secant Nation. So Councilor Breaker has offered to be involved whenever there's an Indigenous youth involved in the program directly, to make sure that there is a level of communication and that there is a level of support for that youth to participate in the program.
Okay, great, that's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Deputy Mayor Peterson.
Thank you, Worship. My questions also relate to the youth and Indigenous diversion program, and my first question is regarding the level of partnership with Sixica. So, do you? I know you've spoken to Ruben and that he's given his willingness, but I guess my question is, so Francis Butch Wolflag, for instance, has developed the NICHA program, which is, and restorative practices, of course, based in Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding. So I'm just wondering if there's a formalized partnership with Sixica around, because how they run their restorative practice is different. Somewhat. Like, I guess my question relates to the process you're using.
Okay, I'm not entirely familiar with everything that Francis Wolflag has on the go, and maybe it's focused particularly on Secant Nation land. Certainly, it's not something that we can't have our youth involved in. But specifically, the practice that we have in place to make sure that there's some level of consistency, regardless of how many programs that are out there. We're certainly willing to partner with any one of the alternate youth justice programs that are active in our area. But where our members have this as an option, and it could be a referral to that program if it's most appropriate. And again, in discussion with Councilor Breaker, that might be the most suitable option for that particular youth. But at its core, how our members are rolling it out is if a crime's been committed, typically property crime first, maybe second time offense, or if it has to do with very select persons crimes, and that might be in the realm of bullying perhaps, where an offense has been committed here in Strathmore. Well, our approach is if the crime was committed here in Strathmore, then you can make recompense or do something to contribute to your community. And all of us live here. What typically happens again is if the member decides and sees that the person is a candidate based on the criteria that we have in place, then there are discussions with, of course, the youth, the parents, the victim as well, and if there are other interested parties such as Secant Nation, then certainly they have input as well. Once we arrive at a solution, really what ends up happening is rather than going to court, the member does have a compelling document that's for down the road. If the youth complies with the nature of the agreement in place, then that document compelling them to court is placed in non-effect, and then we can just make sure we document the fact that the youth was diverted and they complied with the program itself. However, if there is non-compliance, then we would ensure that that youth does go to the court system, and the Crown Prosecutor would know that we tried a diversionary method and it was not successful for whatever reason that would be at play.
Yeah, thank you. In a previous life, I was a restorative justice facilitator and a curriculum leader in Alberta with the Professional Development Corporation, the Alberta Teachers Association for Restorative Practice. So that's the background behind my question. And my second question is, how many youth have accessed the program to date under this diversion program?
I can tell you 0. We were fortunate that we were not seeing a really rampant youth crime. And when we all walk the community, we do see that there's graffiti here and there that pops up every once in a while. We know that we've had some problems in the washrooms and the parks in the past, but as far as rampant youth crime is concerned, we're not really seeing a lot right now. That trend could potentially change, but as we stand right now, we're just not seeing it.
Thank you. My last question is, does the diversion program adhere to the tenets of restorative practice or to youth justice, or is it a combination of both? And the reason that I asked the question was that I noted that investigating officers determine the eligibility. And so I'm assuming these are all officers that are trained in one or the other or both, that they have certification?
Elements of both, but no specific certification. I can tell you that the practice that we follow is based on my experience and my training and the process that I expect to be delivered within our detachment. Now, this is just one step in the judicial process. So this is a pre-charge diversionary measure that we're trying to roll out. So if it does get to a point where perhaps some of the parties aren't agreeing and we move up to the Crown, where the charge is for the Crown Prosecutor, then there are other processes in place throughout the criminal justice system that they can intervene. But really what we want to try to do is just really at its basics, and I really focus on, I guess if you can call it old school community policing, that
Right.
we know the people in our community, we know our communities, we want to work together as a community, and when you do a wrong, then you got to make it right. And with that, that's the restorative portion of it. But the youth justice part about it is, again, there is a lesson to be learned in that. And I really, even look to how we raise our children, even with my own, is that if you do something wrong, you got to make it right. And there is the power and knowledge of, I guess, or deterrence in the knowledge of consequence as well, right? So, to use an example, if the kids keep taking cookies out of the cookie jar, nothing ever happens, nothing's going to stop them from doing it. That's really what we're getting at with this program. So I want to keep it very easy, simple, and basic for our members. It's something that we can consistently apply. And regardless of the other groups that are operating in the community, we want to make sure that we have at least another option available to our members that's easy. It can be done at the lowest level possible, which is at the first time the person comes into contact with the police.
I'm really appreciative of the program. My last thing, in restorative justice and the IIRP, their evidence-based peer-reviewed results are nothing short of phenomenal. But the bastardizations of those programs have been disastrous, and that is my concern. So I guess when I see that the town of Strathmore is monitoring the restorative practice, one of the things I'd be really interested in is knowing how you plan on doing that and what measures you will put in place to see what those outcomes are. I think that's a really important component of it. And I just see huge capacity to do exactly what you said, which is to build a locally based program that can be responsive to the needs of this community and the broader community. And I think that doing it in utilizing tried and true practices will be really, really useful. But I would like to request from administration that information. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, Staff Sergeant. One of the things I just wanted to compliment you on is the community engagement that I've seen. I go to a lot of events, and you're there as many times as I am, and I'm thinking back to the powwow that was held at the curling rink, and that was such a well-attended powwow, and your members were there in large numbers, and it's much appreciated. The other thing I just wanted to make a comment about and compliment all the people involved is the Strathmore Youth Diversion Program. I'm assuming it's the same thing. There was some young teens behind the Value Drug Mart. Some things happened. A mother of one of the teens contacted me and was very concerned, but she also contacted me after the session was held and was very appreciative of the process and very grateful for the respectful approach that was afforded her teen son. So I think there was a lot of relief on behalf of the mom, but also a sense that it was going to be an impactful thing and done in a respectful way. So thank you. Again, thank you for your report. Very clear, and I hope you and your family have a great Christmas.
Thank you to all of you as well.
Thank you. That brings us to item 5.2, Secan Open House Results and Proposed Land Use Bylaw 14-11. And Megan, you're presenting. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I'm Megan Williams, Planner 3. I have with me Chief Sturgeon. We're going to present to you the results of the Secant open house that we had earlier today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the next steps for Secans. So just a brief reminder, the Land Use Bylaw number 1411 was amended in May of this year to revise the regulations around Secans. During the public hearing for this amendment, there was kind of like an indication that more outreach, some more conversations and discussions needed to happen with folks in town. And so from that, we ended up holding an open house on August 30th. We had 12 attendees. We had a brief presentation during the open house, and we had the ability to speak to all of the attendees about their individual situations and what next steps might look like. So during those discussions, the common items that came up were the cost of the applications, whether there would be any exemptions for some of the hazardous materials. There were concerns around vandalism and safety, and they also had some concerns with the new setback requirements. So after the open house, administration held like a number of internal discussions to work out how best to compromise. We wanted to make sure that any proposed changes still maintained and improved the health and safety of our residents and first responders while not encumbering the local business owners. So there are three main areas that we are going to be proposing changes to. So the fees bylaw, which you've already seen last week, I believe, came through, the land use bylaw, and then a few, the fire department's going to be making a handful of operational changes as well. So the fees bylaw went before council last week. So the RFD that you see before you is a little bit out of date. The proposed fees need to be, they're reevaluated. So it was approved to increase the fees for accessory buildings to $275. However, there was kind of like a little discount added in there. So if there's any subsequent accessory building on the same application in the same lot is $100. So if you've got like 5 Secans, it would be $275 plus $400, $675. So a little bit cheaper than having to pay $275 for each one. So the next steps for planning is that we're going to be bringing forward an amendment to the land use bylaw in the new year. So we are going to be proposing to remove the hazardous materials restrictions and the blanket venting requirements. So those changes don't change the venting requirements under building code. It's just in the land use bylaw. So the building code does state that any storage of hazardous materials, the Secan does need to be vented. So if they're not storing hazardous materials with the proposed change, they won't need to vent their Secan. So regardless of what they're going to be storing in their Secan, they still need to get a development permit. They'll still need to get a building permit. We are also looking to define temporary placement of a Secan with the intent of exempting those Secans from obtaining a development permit and potentially building permits as well. We'll have to have further discussions with our safety code inspector. So again, like whether they need to get a building permit is likely to hinge on what is being stored within that Secan. So the fire department is going to be making a handful of changes as well, so I'll pass it off to Chief Sturgeon to explain those to you.
Thank you. So through your worship to council. So the fire department will be looking at doing a few things. We will expand our scope of our annual fire inspection to include all Secans. During those inspections, we'll be noting the contents of the Secan, ensure the Secan has adequate signage, and if it is storing dangerous goods, that is ventilated properly as per NFPA 68 guidelines. We've started working with the GIS department already to create a Secan registry, is what we're calling it, where owners can easily go online and submit their information. The fire department can also do this on the owner's behalf, so we can go into the program and submit the information for them if they don't have access to internet and things like that. The registry will contain the owner's name, the address of the parcel that the Secan is on, the year the Secan was placed on the property, whether there is a valid development and building permit, and during that development building permit process, if they filed a fire safety plan as part of that permit requirement. We also have emergency contact information that the fire department will input into their pre-planning software, so we have all that information should a call come about on that property. And if the Secan storing dangerous or hazardous materials that it meets NFPA 68 and has a UN placard that's easily accessible visually for the fire department upon responding, and whether or not there are compressed gases stored, and basically all compressed gases shall not be stored in a Secan as per the Alberta Building Code, and that was verified with the inspector.
Thank you, Chief. So that does conclude our presentation. If council has any questions at all, we are happy to answer them.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Chief. Councillor Montgomery first, followed by Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. And both of you, yeah, thank you very much for listening to the community and for making modifications to the plan. I appreciate that. So one question I have has to do with, and I really appreciate that you guys have changed the ventilation requirements. I think that kind of helps quite a bit with some of the issues that people are facing. My concern is with, so I've tried to find vents that are like a ½ meter by a ½ meter, and like I'm unable to find a vent that is even that big. So my question or my concern, I guess, is that we allow for alternate approved engineering solutions, but if there is no like ½ meter by ½ meter vent on the market, then we're basically putting everyone into that alternate engineered solution. So before we pass this, I would appreciate it if you guys could look into this, like, maybe I missed it or something like that, but if you guys could look into it a bit further and just maybe see if there is anything that won't make just basically default people into the alternative approved engineering solution. Because if people are just going to, by default, have to go with an alternative, then we should probably make that clear up front and maybe even have some sort of a solution, ahead of time that we can offer people, like, a combination of vents or something like that. Yeah, that I would appreciate that for sure, if you guys could bring that information for the next, like, whenever this is brought back. And another question I have has to do with, like, so we prohibit direct venting towards any sort of buildings, but we don't mention a distance to like any building. So it would help if we said 30 meters, 90 meters, whatever our actual intent is. And then finally, so I noticed that we prohibit using Secants for dwelling units in all circumstances. And I just want to confirm, so, at some point in the future, somebody wanted to build like some sort of a living dwelling unit using a Secan, like this would prohibit that, like they would have to get some sort of special permission or something like that, even if it was like, let's say a pre-built, like a modular type. Okay.
Through the chair, if I might answer one of the questions. So on the vents, It is a building code issue and it's specified, and if it was going to be an alternative solution that didn't stipulate the requirements in the code, the onus would be on the proponent to provide that solution and demonstrate it meets the code. It's not the town's expertise to be getting into that, and it's something we shouldn't be getting into from a liability. So if there's a deviation from the code, the onus would be on the Secan owner to demonstrate to the town that it meets the equivalency of that.
Yeah, like I can appreciate that. If we, so like I guess the question is, does the building code state, for instance, that you have to have a half-meter by half-meter vent within 6 inches of the floor? I presume it doesn't. If it does, then yeah, that is on them to kind of comply with that. But if it doesn't state those things specifically, then we're kind of creating that issue, I think. Go ahead, though.
Yeah, it's through the chair. So I mean, my days of reading thousands of pages of building code are well beyond me. So I'm not sure exactly what it says. My comment is, or my point is, that it's not for us to find solutions to meet the intent of the building code. That onus is on the Secan owner, and then to demonstrate to the town that it meets the intent of the building code.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Is this what the building code says is the requirement for venting a unit this big?
Just a small clarification, which I think is what's getting hung up. So the ventilation requirements in the land use bylaw, we're proposing to take them out entirely. We're not going to say, oh, if you're storing hazardous materials, this is the size of your vent that it has to be. That there's no venting anything.
I see.
In the land use bylaw at all. So It's all going to come from building code, and I believe that they've got a set of formulas depending on what's being stored within the Secan that would dictate what the size of the opening has to be.
Okay, because yeah, that's what my concern was. Sorry, I was hung up, I guess, on the 6 inches from the floor and the half. Okay, so yeah, that makes more sense, I guess. Okay, thank you, and thank you very much, Mr. Scoble. And yeah, if you want to comment about like the dwelling unit one, my question was like, so I guess this does prohibit, even somebody using something that's been modified to actually be a proper dwelling unit then?
Through the chair, yes, it would. They would have to go through basically a land use bylaw amendment in order to allow it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Montgomery. Councillor Wiley?
I want to say thank you. I think this is a perfect example of how administration has made my job as a councillor so pleasant. So this was an issue that we were all getting emails about. Some people were quite unhappy, and I was just told, like, wait, administration's dealing with it. And you've come back with this, you describe it as just the best way to compromise, and I totally agree. It's an example of your willingness to listen to our community, listen to the concerns, look at the Alberta, what the building codes are allowing, look at safety, and you've just come up with a really good balance that I think is something that I can really get behind. So thank you very much to everyone who worked on this. Just thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Deputy Mayor Peterson, and then Councillor Mitzner.
Yeah, thank you for this. So my only question is the level of onerousness, if that's a word, on the department. Does this cause a lot of extra work for you, or, yeah?
Sorry, through your worship. So, of course, it's increased workload, but, we've been gracious enough to have Megan work with us on this project, and it's been frustrating at times for her, for sure. So I think because the level of safety to our responders, this is very important to us. And, although it's going to increase the workload, we have some really great people there that can help us get through this. I think the front loading will be a little intense, but I think after that, just maintaining will be quite easy. So we're not too worried about it there.
Councillor Mitzner.
Just to reinforce for the public, is this zone specific, or is there any options if you have the longer lots, residential lots? Can you put one in a residential area?
Through the chair, no, Secans cannot be used for storage in residential, on residential properties. We do have a small allowance. If you're moving, you can
pods, yeah.
yeah, for a period of 10 days.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mitzner. I was going to say the same thing as Deputy Mayor Peterson as far as the staff time that might be involved, but I appreciate your comments there, and that obviously this is very important to your officers as well. A quick question for you, Chief, on the checks of these Secans. How does a school property impact this? Are we still able to, is your department still able to check Secans on a school property that's owned by Golden Hills or Christ the Redeemer?
Yeah, so through your worship, currently anything that's been on a business, we've been kind of checking them, like we're seeing what's inside. This really just formalizes that process. We were kind of mixed signals all over, and we had things that we wanted to do, but we didn't want to impose them on the property owners if it wasn't necessary. So we felt it was better to go through this process than start the enforcement after. There's going to be a long period where there'll be a grace period where we'll work with people to bring them into compliance. But as far as on the school properties, it would be no different than a commercial property. So we'll work with them depending on what they're using them for.
Perfect. That's just what I wanted to hear. Lastly, thank you to administration and the staff for all your work on this. I'll come to Councilor Langmaid right away. I'm really grateful that we slowed down on this and we had the open house and we got a chance to engage the public, work with them, listen to them, and find some common ground. I really like what's going to be coming to us. I think there's going to be a lot of satisfied people in the community who've had some concerns and have had some questions answered by you and your staff. So kudos to all of you. Councilor Langmaid.
Thank you very much. I have just a couple of questions. The first is about the fee that can be expected by people who are using Secans for, I understand the initial inspection comes with the development permit fee, but the subsequent inspections every 2 years, would that fall in line with the other amendments that we made in the fees bylaw, the $75 for the first and $275 for the second?
Yeah, so through your worship, that if the Secan's already on a business, they're already paying their fee, so there wouldn't be subsequent fees for those Secans. That would just be included in their fire life safety inspection for the whole property. Okay. So it'd be the $75. If there was an issue with one Secan and we had to go back, then potentially there'd be that $275 return fee for that.
Okay, so it would just be included in the regular program. Then that makes sense to me. The second question I have is kind of around the use of Secans for, and I'm going to call it temporary storage, even though it's more than 10 days. But one place I see them frequently is in neighborhoods that are under development, where they're being used for storage of construction equipment, and that could include hazardous materials of things that are potentially gas powered. So I see Secans used for that. I also see utility trailers used for that purpose a lot. And I'm wondering if there's a similar risk with utility trailers as there are with Secans. I'm not proposing any changes here, I'm just curious.
I don't like the utility trailers like on wheels. I don't think like the safety is the same for them. Like they're not. Yeah,
I stumped them.
Good question, thank you. So through your worship, so I could see the cargo trailers, like an enclosed trailer is kind of what you're talking about. So I would see the biggest difference between that and a Secan is that the construction of that. So it wouldn't become pressurized to the point where essentially it becomes a bomb, I guess, per se, like for lack of a better term. But with the Secans, and especially being a part of the Enderby incident in BC and being able to attend that, just the immense amount of pressure that was built up in those, I couldn't see that happening with an enclosed trailer, just because of their construction.
It's a material thing. Like
it's a material.
Thinner steel or aluminum.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would that use of using a Secan for construction equipment storage in technically a residential area where people may or may not be, would this make that a non-permitted use? Is that a new rule now? You cannot store your construction equipment in developing areas in a Secan? for a multitude of reasons I can think of by reading this, because it's on residential property, might have hazardous materials, might be there longer than 10 days.
Through the chair, that'll be something that we have to consider. In my opinion, it's not reasonable to prohibit on a construction site Secant for storage for that purpose. So that's something that we will take into note for the land use bylaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you, yeah, just it was a question I had, especially with Sergeant Wilgosh here, thinking about the, I've had lots of contractors coming in through my house, and they've all been complaining about how often tools are getting stolen. So I'm thinking, I don't really want to take away options for people working in our community to be able to keep their equipment that, they use to make their livelihood safe. But I also don't want to create a situation where we're creating a safety hazard for our first responders. So I understand it's a delicate balance there, and I appreciate all the work you've put into finding that balance for us. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you. I have one last question that's similar similar to Councillor Langmaid's. And I imagine the grandfather system is in, when we've annexed new lands into the town and there's an existing acreage that becomes part of the town, how is the Secan bylaw affected by that? Am I repeating something else, or? No, you're just identifying. Oh, a new issue. I'm sorry. I was just sorry about that.
That one's, there's like a multitude of layers with that one. So regardless if it's an annexation from the county, they'd still be required to get the proper permitting, whatever that was with the county. Chances are they'd still need to get a building permit. Development permit I'm not 100% on, but you're right, they would be considered like legal non-conforming so long as they met the bylaws and the building code at the time of the Secan being placed. In terms of whether or not they can be on a residential property, if I can make a grand assumption, chances are any annexation that we do from the county is going to be zoned agricultural general, and I believe Secans are allowed on ag zoning, maybe. That's something that I'd have to double check.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of a couple of properties that I've driven by, and if they've got, I don't even know if they've got Secans, but if they've got Secans, are they now considered residential, or are they still considered agricultural? That's what I would like clarity on.
If I could just offer
Sure.
something through the chair. Typically after an annexation, we'd go through I'd say a pretty thorough analysis of the zoning and the land use of each parcel that we've annexed, and then come through to council with some amendments. And at that point, we'd have to consider the existing uses, will the grandfather or not, have some different regulations for them based on parcel size, et cetera, and use. But that would be a typical kind of first step after an annexation.
Okay, thank you. And if the annexation has happened like years ago, then we would possibly look at case-by-case situations? Like, I'm thinking of a couple of acreages that are now in town boundaries because we annexed the land prior to 2010. I believe it was annexed between 2007 and 2010. So that's what I'm wondering about, the existing acreages that are now part of the town.
Yeah, so we would just go through a process with it, as the staff has suggested. There'd be a time when things are grandfathered till we kind of get to look at them and make sure they have permits. We're not going to kind of go out tomorrow and look at or when we get the land use bylaw done and look at everything and make sure they're in compliance. It'll take some time.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Mitzner, did you have a comment?
My understanding is until it changes from AG to R1, it's not the town's jurisdiction.
Through the chair, if it's within the town's boundaries, it falls under our jurisdiction. Usually when I can speak to the 2010 annexations, most of those lands where they've not been developed yet are still underneath that agricultural general zoning. The ones from 2007, I'm not 100% sure on, and I would need to double check the land use bylaw to see if the restriction of seat counts on residential properties extends to agricultural properties. I'd have to double check that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Chief Sturgeon. Much appreciated. And thank you for your willingness and ability to answer some of these questions. And I'm not sure if I saw it in here. Is there a date where we can expect this to come back to us?
I haven't put a date yet.
Okay.
I've started working on the bylaw already. I'm hoping to have it in by Q1. Sooner, depending on how much engagement is required before we bring it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? Thank you again for your presentation. And that brings us to 5.3, Asset Management Policy. Andre, good evening and welcome.
Good evening. One moment, please. Sorry. Okay. So, good evening again. It's my pleasure, as always, to speak to council. And I guess before I begin, please note that all of my comments will be made through the CAO to the chair and to council. So it is my pleasure to speak to you again about asset management. Tonight, if I were to maybe just skip to the next slide, we will be talking about, well, I'll be continuing this introduction. And then we're going to view a short video. Unfortunately, no popcorn is provided. No municipal popcorn. But following that, we will have a discussion about our asset management system and the town's asset management program, and of course, any questions at that point. Again, my name is Andre Aloa. I am the Town Asset Management Officer. And tonight I will be presenting a draft policy, the asset management policy. And before we begin, I guess I'd like to just sort of go over my previous presentation by showing you this video. I think it does a good job of sort of encapsulating the considerations involved in municipal asset management. And so if we get to that slide, and we had some issues before, so let's hope this goes well.
Hi, I'm Lisa, the mayor of my town. The role of my council is to ensure that residents are provided with services that are essential to our quality of life, like clean drinking water and sanitation, transportation, parks and recreation services. Our community's infrastructure assets are critical to deliver these services. Today, like in many Canadian communities, 1/3 of my town's assets are in poor condition, in part because most of our assets were built in the 50s and 60s and are reaching the end of their useful life. At the same time, our community has grown, and so has the demand for new and improved services. We've also had to spend money to upgrade our assets to comply with new environmental and safety standards. We made investment decisions based on our ability to finance the upfront development costs. However, the bigger ongoing costs to operate, maintain, and eventually replace these assets were not fully built into the analysis. Plus, our assets are vulnerable. Climate change has resulted in impacts from more severe storms, flooding, and other unexpected events. Our assets were not designed with these impacts in mind. For example, one of our roads was washed out during last spring's flood, and we had to reprioritize and redirect money in response. Now we're caught in a cycle where new infrastructure is needed to service growth that has been sprawling beyond the core. Residents count on us to deliver exceptional services. We need to catch up on overdue maintenance of existing assets and to finance the replacements of our old ones. We strive to keep taxes and fees low. However, the revenue we collect to manage all this isn't keeping pace with it all. So my council has been faced with some tough decisions. Do we adjust tax rates? Do we delay maintenance and repairs even longer and risk the consequences? How much should we place annually in a reserve fund? Do we reduce the level of services? Do we delay new projects? So what are we doing? We're engaging in asset management planning to be more strategic about how we manage our assets and spending. We're reviewing our assets across all departments in a holistic and integrated way. We're evaluating the full life cycle costs of different capital assets and land use decisions to ensure we're choosing the best long-term option for the community. To become more resilient to a changing climate, we're developing a climate adaptation plan and starting to identify how we can become less dependent on fossil fuels. We now recognize the value of the services our natural assets provide, like managing stormwater and improving water quality. We're also speaking to residents about the cost of service delivery and their needs and priorities. All this work is helping us to coordinate our infrastructure work and set priorities. Now we have an ongoing process in place that is proactive and allows us now to make better informed and strategic decisions. We're now much better placed to support my town's economy and our residents' quality of life sustainably. The health of our assets is central to achieving these goals. Do some of my town's challenges seem familiar to you?
So that was a video that was produced by FCM, which is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And I think it does a good job of sort of highlighting how we need to approach a lot of these problems with long-term decisions to meet our needs in the future. As well, by establishing a proper asset management system, we can identify choices and prioritize accordingly. So just as a reminder, what is that asset management system and what does it look like for the town of Strathmore? So again, insert that joke, it's not software, because maybe that's the only thing that you remembered, and that would actually make me happy. Wouldn't make me sad, no. But what is asset management? So last time, I think I described it. My argument was that I like to think of it as it is something done for community, and it is for the services that we provide that community. It's also to better achieve our goals, our objectives. And those goals and objectives, of course, need to be guided by, our council's priorities. And so there needs to be that line of sight. And that's kind of what I presented last time. And I also sort of said, well, that's me, but there is a conventional definition, and there it is again. It's that coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize our investments in our assets so that we can provide the appropriate levels of service that is important to our community. So the asset management system specifically then looks like that image that you see above me, I guess. And it's comprised of these different components. So the most important component is really the strategic vision, or those guiding principles. And I'm very happy to hear that it seems like in the new year you'll be revising them, or at least going over them, and that's very important. That is what will sort of allow administration to define our tactics. Then is a policy. So policy is essentially a commitment to say, yes, we have a defined methodology or understanding of how we want to tackle these issues, and we commit to tackling these problems in that manner, and that's what I'm presenting tonight, is that policy. Then there is what's called the Strategic Asset Management Plan, and I apologize because all of these things sound very similar and it can get very confusing, but effectively, the strategic asset management plan is a document that guides administration with how we will implement plans, how we will create strategies. How do we incorporate risk or not? How do we look at the condition of our assets, etc.? So that is the strategic asset management plan. And then finally, of course, what this is all about is creating these plans to achieve the goals or the strategic vision. So those plans are where we have the strategies that we will execute on to realize that vision. So ultimately, this is the asset management system that we are trying to set up, and this asset management system is very much central to the asset management program. So everything that we do around So everything we do around asset management is the asset management program, and it's got a system, and everything that we do should be aligned with our vision. How do we ensure that we're getting closer to our goals? So we have a roadmap, and we have all of these activities that are working towards creating a system that can properly facilitate the creation of asset management plans. And if you see there at the very top is a policy. So that has been written. And of course, tonight we are not going to be adopting it. It is simply an introduction to this draft document. And so what is the asset management policy? It's this document. I think if I click on here, it should open. And, you all have it? Okay. Yeah, so I'll take a step back. So that policy, it is included in the agenda package. And I feel like it probably is worthwhile just to go over it at a very high level. And thank you very much to Chris for helping me put it into a much better format than it was previously. So we have a policy statement, and basically it is very much that. It's the first sentence is, this policy articulates council's commitment to asset management. That sets the tone. The first section is definitions, and I guess it's worth mentioning that these definitions are just a reflection of industry standards when it comes to defining those terms that you see in there. The second section is the application. So this applies to, of course, town Strathmore employees and members of council. We've also sort of defined some of the asset categories that will be bound by this policy. We have a responsibilities section, and it goes through the responsibilities of council, CAO, and staff in a way that is, appropriate for a policy. So, council is obviously very high level, and then down to staff where, it is appropriate for policy to that level of detail. Finally, the policy statements themselves reflect the asset management tactics that are considered best practice, and these are all activities that support our asset management program. So that's the draft policy. And I didn't want to go into a long sort of conversation about asset management tonight, but I am open to any and all questions. So,
thank you. Councilor Mitzner.
Thank you. I honor your systems and your choices and your inventory assets, but I struggle with a vision when we still do not have an inventory of what our assets are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. We do have a number of inventories. I think to build on what we have, it should be better documented. I agree with that. But we do have a number of asset inventories. The issue, of course, is coordinating it. And so through this policy, we'll have a sort of systematic way of collecting information on our asset categories because, for example, GIS has a view of the assets, finance has a view of the assets, engineering has another view of the assets. And what we need to do as an organization is coordinate that information better, and that's part of the system.
Do we not have a list of assets, tax-based assets, as municipal buildings, parking lots? God bless you, lands that we own? Like, it's hard to run a business when you don't know what your assets are.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, and so, yeah, to my previous comment, we do have those in a rough form.
Will that be part of the process then, Andre? We'll put it into a final, more transparent or polished list of things that would be considered like a one-stop place where you could look at all the municipal buildings, all the town parking lots, the town parks.
Yeah, so that's part of the asset registry. So part of the asset registry is, identifying all of those things that have been mentioned. And in addition to that, in terms of sort of knowledge management, there should also be efforts made to document where this information is coming from, who is the owner of that information, how often it is updated, and if there's a conflict, who is the authority when it comes to defining truth. And that is something that would be a part of the asset management system. So it would be the asset registry component of the asset management program.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Peterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think you meant to say owner or purveyor of the information, because if you've been in this community for a while, there's a big difference.
Thank you.
One of the things when I was looking at the presentation that I wondered, and it's probably there, I'm just not sure that I interpreted it. And one of them was, so my little bit of information is a dangerous thing, and I took the FCM course on asset management, that they offer. Yeah, like a little bit of information.
Okay.
It's this much. And so one of the things that they talked a lot about in there was supporting training and community. And I don't know how it applies here, except I can see how it would be beneficial in the future around partnerships like the Strathmore Motor Products Center, when Mayor Fuel was a councillor at the time when that was initiated, and he was part of this engendering this partnership group. He was really instrumental in it. And some of the things that they did in there was talking about that asset management piece, even though it maybe wasn't under the same editorial process that you've introduced, but it was extremely useful. And everyone involved in that partnership was able to determine the value of that asset into the future. And so that training component, I don't see it as one of the A to N listings, but it might be there. And I don't need you to tell me whether it is or not tonight, but I just thought, it might be useful to see it there. And the other one was in the investment decisions around potential in terms of asset management. And we have a CAO that has a lot of experience in asset management in terms of garnering advantages, for instance, in water rights. And I know that it's there and, possibly in Section H, for instance, develop and enhancing asset management knowledge and competencies. But I didn't see that whole investment strategy that FCM program talked about specific to this. So, I just throwing it out there, like I am a pretty rank amateur in the scope and sequence of this. And I also just want to thank Councilor Mitzner for her dogged determination in this. It's useful, and she carries a lot of that information, and I'm appreciative, and appreciative of the work that you're bringing here. And I know it's just the tip, but it's exciting.
I think so
and
too.
scary at the same time.
Exciting. I'll stick with exciting.
Well, you know what, when you live long in this community, you know that what's under the ground has suffered a lack of attention because of what had to come above the ground, and just, that's what happened we were for 4 years, I think, the most, experienced the most rapid growth of any community in Canada, and, you know, all of those things contributed, and so now we are here. Thank you.
No problem. And I think, yeah, to your comments, I think what you are seeking is likely to be found in the strategic asset management plan. So more of the guideline, right. So this policy being more of a high-level piece wouldn't sort of go into that or those topics.
So it does say, sorry. It does note that it incorporates asset management into the rest of the corporate plan. It does say that, but it does also speak quite specifically to other aspects of it. So I guess I was struggling a little bit with the, you know, I've sat through lots of, you know, presentation in terms of asset management. This was the longest editorial presentation I ever had, but it was useful in the sense that it makes you really think about, I know it's high level, but it also speaks to specifics and where they fit. And that's the conceptual part of it that I think, like Councilor Mitzner, that I'm struggling with. But.
Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilor Montgomery, followed by Councilor Langmaid.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks again for the presentation and for the presentation last time. I think it was that was great. Could you please share that video link with us just so that I can? Yeah, it very well encapsulates the council experience of yeah, a lot of things to spend money on and not enough money. So yeah, if you could send me that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Montgomery. Councilor Langmaid.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation today. I'm always excited to see you here. I like asset management. I am a nerd like that. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I realize that might have come across weird, but I meant it as a compliment in all sorts of ways. I have just a couple of questions. One is really basic. Just in section 2.2, number B, it says accessible parks and pathways. What is the difference between that and an inaccessible park and pathway? And do we have any inaccessible parks and pathways? I'm just curious what that accessible means in there.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting adjective, isn't it? I think the idea with that is that our parks should be accessible. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's not to say that, of course, there is the inverse, where we do have inaccessible parks and pathways. That is language that could be made more concise.
I was just curious. Yeah, for the asset category, it seems like parks and pathways would fit. Accessible would be a descriptor of different types of parks and pathways we have. Anyways, that's nitpicking. The other kind of question / comment I have is just that, and I know that I am going beyond where we are at right now, but I would love to see this scalable to include maybe some environmental assets as well as we work to improve our program. You know, the video discussed, land use planning is a part of asset management, and I know that, Edmonton is underway with kind of an asset management program to understand the value of the land use of the surrounding city, and really what they are losing is an opportunity cost when they choose to develop an acre, a quarter section of agricultural land versus allow it to stay agricultural and versus densification in other parts of the city, and those kind of decisions and toss-ups. I know that that's probably a bit more advanced than where we're starting with this program, and I understand that, but I will never stop championing it. I would love to see more of that. And then I was just wondering, I know that this is probably going to fit more in kind of the strategy section, but I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about the risk matrix that you're looking at implementing for assessing all of these assets.
Well, that is something that I would have to work with our new risk management coordinator on.
Okay.
And
Can
so,
you talk a little bit about what that process might look like? Or am I putting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit here?
yeah, at this point, I don't know if I'd be comfortable speaking on that, simply because I'd want to get her opinion on the subject first. So it's something that we could certainly come back with. And I think the intersection of risk, especially when it comes to managing assets, is an important one. And I think that as we continue down this process, that will be more and more well-defined. And right now, it's somewhat vague. We did have, speaking of training, we did have a lunch and learn last week where I spoke to risk. So that's very much on the radar. But I think at this point, before I go any further, I think it would be best to speak to her about that.
That's all right. That's understandable, and no urgency on that at all. I was just curious how we had kind of been approaching that, but I think I'm just a little bit early on the jump there. This looks good. I'm excited to see where we can go with this. I'm excited to see the information that comes out of it and how it will help us plan. I know that the policy is the first step, but it's also just a small step into the whole process of asset management. So I appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to seeing where this takes us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Langmaid. I have two questions, one for Mr. Scoble, and that is parks are considered an asset according to page 47, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So my question is, one of the things I've always been interested in as far as this town is concerned is the development of a very large naturalized kind of a park. And I'm thinking like Fish Creek. I know part of that is Provincial Park, Nose Hill. So my question to our CAO, Mr. Scoville, is how do we go about achieving one other than relying on developers' 10% allotted for municipal reserve to possibly partner on, when two developing subdivisions border each other? I was told that you could have an agreement where developers could pool their 10% reserve to create a larger park or municipal reserve. So is there a way, and I guess one of the things is, could a town or a municipality ever have a special assessment for every property owner to create and purchase land for a large park, a large naturalized green space?
Well, yes. I mean, a council can establish a levy for probably just about anything you want if you wanted a special, separate item on your property tax bill. So, yeah, that could certainly be done. Certainly it would take some negotiation with landowners. But, I think that's really something we want to capture. If that's an area council wants to explore, we want to capture that in the strategic retreat in the new year, because something like that would fundamentally, defer to Jamie if necessary for more, but that's something that would fundamentally be captured in the MDP that we're working on, right? Like, you would want to get that, because that's your overarching planning document for the community. So that would be the place to start with that, and then work with landowners to make that happen. Thank you. And is a special assessment, is it something that can be ongoing over a period of a few years, or can it also be like a one-time injection of that revenue to purchase land to create a park? I'd have to look onto the operating side of it. Certainly a capital levy to establish the park. I'd have to get back to you on ongoing operating levy. Okay, thank you. And then my second question, I think, is easier. And I've always wondered this. There's a large natural area in the Aspen subdivision that is poplars and aspens, hence the name. Thank you. But anyway, it's to most people in Strathmore, it's kind of an undiscovered, unknown thing. It's just sitting there. And my question is, as far as assets, like Councilor Mitzner is saying, is that considered one of our town parks? I know it's just a rough natural area. Nothing has been done with it, and a lot of homes back onto it, and I'm sure people love the fact that it's a natural area. But is that considered one of our assets? And if so, is that something we might want to put some pathways in, some little areas where people can enjoy that and make it more known as far as one of our town parks? And I don't expect an answer tonight. Jamie, I just wanted to maybe put it on your radar and just see if
if it's been turned back to the municipality. Aspen has been fully developed for many, many years now. So I'm just wondering about that large green space.
Through the chair, I guess there's a couple questions there. I guess I'll try to answer most of them if I can. It's interesting because Andre and I actually did speak about natural assets and how they fit into this policy, and I think it's probably something we might include under that list of assets. In terms of evaluating that, it's early days, I would argue, in terms of how that's evaluated and can you get agreement from developers, et cetera, what that looks like. So I think we'll probably put that in. I think in the final version we bring back to you, I think it's a good idea. Secondly, though, in terms of the Aspen area and that I'll call it a natural park, I think at some point if we have an overall parks plan in terms of what we do with parks, certainly we could consider adding some more active areas to that. But I think before we did that, we would look at all of our parks together and also need to do some engagement on that. But yeah, I think natural area is an important thing to consider in terms of the overall parks plan as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Andre? Seeing none? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
That brings us to item 6, question and answer period. Councilor Langmaid.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I have a very important question for administration this evening. It is December 14th, which means we are 11 days from Christmas. And I am just wondering if administration has done everything they need to do to prepare for the arrival of Santa Claus this year. Has he received any, I understand we've had many discussions about riding and the use of horses in town. I'm not sure that reindeer were ever included in the traffic safety bylaw, but I'm wondering, would Santa, if they are included under this traffic safety bylaw, would Santa have an exemption to bring his reindeer into town this year to deliver gifts?
Through the chair, so we've looked at the Traffic Control Act, and we did take a little bit of leniency and considered Santa's sleigh equivalent to a horse-drawn vehicle in town. So yes, the necessary permissions are in place.
Excellent. Good to know. I'm sure the children of Strathmore will be very excited to know that Santa is ready to arrive here. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Langmaid. A quick question for administration. Is an email request or question to have something added to the first meeting that we have in January, is that suitable, or is there a special form that this new admin wants?
No, that'll work for us.
Okay, thank you. I'm just planning to bring a report on the food bank from its AGM, so I'd like to get that added. I'll send you guys an email. Thank you. Any other questions or comments or answers on life? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to go in camera. Deputy Mayor Peterson.
Your Worship, I would move that council move in camera to discuss items in relation to Section 24, subsection 1A of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act at 7:27 p.m.
Thank you for the motion. All in favor? And we are going in camera. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Claudette. And